Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving into a really dramatic story. A nation transformed.
Absolutely. And the ripples, we still feel them today, don't we?
We really do. We're talking about Iran. You know, you hear Iran, you might think ancient empires, glittering palaces.
Historical image, yeah.
But the 20th century brought this totally different kind of upheaval. Not swords and shields.
No, this was fought with ideology, with oil, huge factor, oil, and faith.
And the pivotal year, 1979. Just picture it. Streets just boiling with unrest.
Millions marching.
Millions. And banners with the name of this elderly cleric, Ayatollah Khomeini, exiled way off in Paris.
Seems sudden, but it really wasn't.
Exactly. That's what our sources show. This was decades in the making, roots going way back. We've got a whole stack of insights here, articles, research, history, to really get at the core forces behind this shift.
And our job, really, is to help you cut through it all, to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge.
A shortcut to understanding.
Yeah, think of it that way. We'll unpack the layers, the faith, the oil, the power that all came together in 79.
And look at its legacy today, which is, well, it's complicated.
It's very complicated.
Okay, so let's unpack it. It's huge. Where do we even start with a revolution this big?
Well, I think you have to go back before 79, way before, to 1953.
1953, okay. Why there?
Because that's a year often, sort of glossed over in Western history books.
Right.
You had Iran's democratically elected prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, and he did something incredibly bold.
He nationalized the oil industry.
Exactly, took it back. It was a direct challenge to British control over Iran's most valuable asset. Huge move.
And the reaction.
Swift and decisive. Our sources, documents, they clearly show the CIA and British intelligence, MI6, they worked together.
Orchestrated a coup.
They did. Mossadegh was out, and the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, his power was massively strengthened. He became effectively an autocratic ruler backed by the West.
So that coup, it just fundamentally changed everything, didn't it?
Oh, profoundly.
Iran basically becomes this pawn in the Cold War. Modernized, sure. Militarized.
Yeah, lots of weapons flowing in.
But not democratized, not at all. So how did that event, 1953, sow the seeds for what blew up later in 79?
Well, it created this deep sense of grievance, this feeling that Iran's destiny wasn't its own.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. The Shah's in power, firmly entrenched. What's his rule like?
On the surface, he's pushing modernization, right? Highways, schools.
Yeah, building things, creating a modern infrastructure. It looked progressive.
But beneath the surface.
That's the key. Beneath the surface, it was a different story. Dissent was simmering constantly.
Yes, of Savak.
Exactly. The Shah's intelligence agency, Savak. Brutal. Imprisonment, torture, executions. Anyone who opposed him politically faced that.
So fear was a major tool.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just political repression. There were deep cultural and economic issues, too.
Like what?
Well, religion was being pushed aside. Traditional values, Islamic values, were often mocked by the elite around the Shah.
Seen as backwards. Sort of, yeah. And the wealth, especially oil wealth, wasn't spreading. It was concentrated among the elite, the Shah's circle.
And the foreign influence, the U.S.
Huge factor. The U.S. wasn't seen as just an ally, more like puppeteers pulling the strings, controlling Iran's resources, backing the Shah. It fed that feeling of lost sovereignty that started back in 53.
So you can see how people would start asking these really tough questions.
Definitely. Questions like, why is our oil controlled by foreigners?
Why do we have to ditch our Islamic identity for this Western materialism that only benefits a few?
And the big one, why can't we choose our own leaders? Why is this Shah, propped up by outsiders, ruling us?
It's a powder keg waiting for a spark.
Precisely. And into that vacuum of trust where the Shah was losing legitimacy, where people felt unheard.
In steps Khomeini.
Ayatollah Khomeini. His voice seemed, well, unshakable, even from exile.
Right, he was exiled. How did his message even get through? He's in Paris, thousands of miles away.
That's one of the most fascinating parts. Cassette tapes.
Cassette tapes? Seriously?
Yeah, seriously. His sermons, speeches, they were recorded, smuggled into Iran.
Yeah.
And these tapes, they spread like wildfire, played in mosques, schools, homes, bypassing all the state censorship, all the official media.
So his words are just thundering against the Shah, against injustice, corruption.
Tyranny, foreign influence, all of it. And he wasn't just some distant cleric anymore. He became a symbol.
The symbol of resistance?
The symbol, hope for something completely different.
Okay, so the message is spreading. Discontent is high. Then things really accelerate. late 1978.
Yeah, that's when it hits the boiling point. The Shah's power just visibly crumbles.
Strikes in the oil industry. That must have crippled the economy.
Hugely important, paralyzing. And the protests weren't just small groups anymore. They swelled into the millions, all across Iran.
Unbelievable scale.
And the climax, it's quite dramatic. Tanks roll into the streets, the regime's final show of force.
Oh, it backfires.
Completely. Instead of dispersing, the crowds stand firm. And then the unthinkable happens. Soldiers start defecting.
Laying down their arms, joining the protesters.
Exactly. Imagine seeing that. The very symbol of the Shah's power just melting away. His authority evaporated.
So the Shah, he's sick, he's run out of options.
He flees. January 1979, he leaves Iran for good.
And just 2 weeks later,
Khomeini returns, lands in Tehran, greeted by, well, millions, throngs of ecstatic followers,
the end of the monarchy.
and the arrival of the Islamic Republic. A seismic shift.
But revolutions, they're never neat and tidy, are they?
Never. And our sources are very clear on this. What came next wasn't the freedom everyone who marched against the Shah had hoped for.
How so?
Well, those groups that had joined forces against the Shah, you had liberals, communists, secular nationalists, a whole coalition, really.
They were quickly pushed aside.
Sidelined is putting it mildly. Many were imprisoned, many were executed. The revolutionary coalition fractured almost immediately.
And a new kind of authoritarianism takes over.
Very quickly. But this time it wasn't draped in royal silk. It was, black turbans and Islamic law.
Specific examples.
Immediately, women were ordered to wear the hijab. Dissent was crushed just as brutally, maybe even more systematically than under the Shah. The press was silenced.
So one form of control replaced by another. Under this concept of Wilayat al-Faqih.
Wilayat al-Faqih, rule of the Islamic jurist. And you have to understand, this wasn't just like a minor theological point. Our research shows this was a radical reimagining of government.
Oh.
It centralized political power directly within the clergy, with Khomeini at the top, in a way that was pretty unprecedented in modern Shia Islam. It fundamentally changed how religion and the state interacted in Iran.
But there are different ways to see this, right? From inside Iran for many supporters.
Oh, absolutely. For many, many Iranians, especially those who deeply believed in the revolution, this wasn't a mistake. It was a correction.
A correction. How?
A reclaiming of identity. An identity they felt was stolen by foreign powers, by Western imperialism for decades, even centuries. It was about Iran standing up, being independent, being proudly Islamic, free from outside control.
So liberation from the West was the primary goal for them.
For many, yes. It wasn't about swapping one dictator for another. In their view, it was about national and spiritual liberation.
Okay, that's the internal perspective, or one major one. But externally, the view shifted dramatically, didn't it? Especially after the U.S. Embassy incident.
The hostage crisis, November 1979, that changed everything in terms of international perception.
52 Americans held hostage for 444 days. That image just burned itself onto the global consciousness.
It really did. That event, maybe more than any other, transforms Iran's image. What started for some as this cry for justice against a repressive regime
became a geopolitical nightmare for the West, particularly the U.S.
Exactly. It cemented Iran as an adversary. Sanctions followed, isolation deepened, and for decades, much of the world saw Iran not as, say, a nation reclaiming its sovereignty, but as a villain, a threat.
So if we connect the dots here, these radically different views, the correction versus the villain, how do they still play out today?
They shape everything. Foreign policy debates, nuclear negotiations, trade relationships, cultural misunderstandings. These competing narratives, born out of the revolution and its immediate aftermath, like the hostage crisis, are still the lens through which Iran and the West often view each other. It's a fundamental clash of perspectives.
It really underlines that the real story, beyond the headlines about oil deals or nuclear talks, is about the people.
Always. It lies in the lives affected profoundly by this revolution.
You think about, the young woman who now has to wear the hijab or risk punishment.
Or the dissident writer or artist silenced by censorship, their hopes dashed.
Or on the other side, the cleric, the Revolutionary Guard member, who genuinely believes they saved the nation's soul from foreign corruption and decadence.
These are the human stories, the dreams, the sacrifices, the costs. That's the heart of it.
Which leaves that huge question hanging in the air, even now, for millions of Iranians. Was it all worth it?
A question that doesn't have an easy answer, still debated fiercely today.
And that brings us right up to the present. Iran today still seems so divided.
Deeply divided. deeply divided between those who still cling to the revolution's original ideals, maybe feel it hasn't gone far enough.
And those who feel the revolution betrayed its promises, that it just swapped one kind of oppression for another.
You see it starkly in the generational tensions.
Yeah.
Younger generations often pushing for more freedoms, social change.
While older generations, or parts of the establishment, defend the principles of the revolution, faith, tradition.
It's a nation wrestling with itself, holding immense power, a deep sense of pride, but also carrying so much pain. It's all mixed together.
A complex reality.
Incredibly complex. And maybe this leads us to a final thought, something for you, our listener, to mull over.
Okay.
If the Iranian Revolution never truly ended, if it just kept evolving, changing form, what does that suggest about how societies change, about revolutions in general? And what does it tell us about how deeply history, these powerful events, echo through generations, shaping a nation's identity, its path, its struggles, long after the initial upheaval?
That's a powerful question. How these echoes continue to shape not just Iran, but how we all interact on the world stage. What lessons are there in its enduring, often painful complexity? Something definitely worth reflecting on.